What if the person sitting next to you right now has no soul? Not metaphorically, not as an insult, but literally, walking, talking, breathing, yet spiritually empty, a vessel without light. For 103 years, this single revelation was deliberately hidden from the world. Helena Blavatsky, the woman who founded modern Theosophy and decoded ancient mysteries that scholars couldn't touch, wrote one final manuscript before her death in 1891. She sealed it with black wax, pressed 3 symbols into the seal that no linguist could decipher, and gave explicit instructions: do not open while humanity still believes everyone is human. The document was locked away in a teakwood box, requiring 3 separate keys, held by 3 different guardians who never met. Even mentioning its existence was forbidden to all but the innermost circle, those who had passed the 7th degree of esoteric training. But in 1994, during a museum renovation in Paris, a restorer's trembling hands accidentally broke that century-old seal. What she discovered inside those yellowed pages changed everything we thought we knew about consciousness, about humanity, about the people we pass every single day. Blavatsky's final warning wasn't about demons or possession. It was something far more disturbing. Some bodies walk without souls, and they don't even know it. Think about that inexplicable emptiness you sometimes sense when looking at certain people. That peculiar feeling that something fundamental is missing behind their eyes. That moment when someone's words sound right, but something in their gaze feels hollow. You weren't imagining it. Blavatsky identified them. She documented their traits. She calculated their percentage in the population. And most importantly, she explained why being near them can gradually extinguish your own inner light, if you don't know how to protect yourself. This isn't ancient mysticism wrapped in complicated language. This is a practical guide to recognizing a phenomenon that modern psychology still can't explain, a truth that was considered too dangerous for the unprepared mind. If you're still reading, you're already different from most people. Something in you sensed this knowledge was coming. Subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because what follows will completely transform how you see the world around you, and more importantly, how you protect yourself in it. The seal is broken. The truth is here. And you're about to discover why they kept it hidden for over a century. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky wasn't a mystic who spoke in riddles. She was a researcher who traveled to Tibet, India, and Egypt, studying with masters who guarded knowledge that predated written history. Born in 1831 in Ukraine, she spent her life translating ancient wisdom into language the modern world could understand, even when that world wasn't ready to hear it. By 1891, she had written thousands of pages, books that would influence everyone from Einstein to Jung, from Thomas Edison to Gandhi. But this final manuscript was different. She dictated it during the monsoon season in Adyar, India, her hands swollen with rheumatism, insisting on sealing it herself. The document wasn't simply hidden, it was protected. The paper wasn't ordinary cotton rag, but Himalayan nettle fiber known for extraordinary durability and resistance to fire and water. The seal contained frankincense mixed with a rare mineral she called protection powder. The lock mechanism on the teakwood box was so complex it required 3 different keys, each held by separate guardians who passed their responsibility through generations. Why such elaborate security for a spiritual text? Because what Blavatsky described wasn't theoretical philosophy, it was observable reality. She claimed to have identified beings who appeared completely human in every physical aspect, but lacked what she called the divine spark, the soul itself. Not demons inhabiting bodies, not people who had lost their souls through evil deeds, but beings who had never housed a soul to begin with. She called them vessels without light, and mental cocoons that lost the thread. She documented their percentage in the population, between 17 and 23%, based on observations across 5 continents. She noted they were more common in urban centers, where the noise and pace of mechanical life masks their fundamental difference. Most disturbingly, she claimed these beings drain energy from those around them, not maliciously but unconsciously, like empty wells drawing from nearby springs. The manuscript traveled under diplomatic protection, changing hands 17 times before reaching its repository at the Musée Guimet in Paris. There it remained undisturbed through 2 world wars, hidden behind an obsidian mirror in a safe with no external keyhole. When a restorer finally opened it in 1994, she reported a strange sensation, like static electricity, but colder, and a metallic smell like ozone after lightning. The pages showed signs of wear in specific sections, as if certain passages had been read repeatedly by the few granted access. Water spots on several pages, tears perhaps, and hastily drawn symbols in the margins that appeared in no other theosophical documents. This wasn't just esoteric speculation. Blavatsky provided detailed observation notes, physical mannerisms, pupil dilation patterns, body temperature variations, speech patterns, even dream analysis. She wrote with the precision of a scientist documenting a new species, and she predicted that the 21st century would see an exponential increase in these soulless beings as material values ascend and spiritual awareness recedes. She warned that only those who learn to recognize and protect themselves would energetically survive. That warning echoes louder today than ever before in our age of unprecedented disconnection, emotional exhaustion, and what we now call burnout. Now I want to know, from which city in the United States are you watching this, or from which country in the world is this content reaching you? Leave it in the comments. I really want to know. Your location matters because Blavatsky claimed certain geographic areas have higher concentrations of what she called thin spots, where these truths become more visible to those ready to see them. The question isn't whether this knowledge is real. The question is, are you ready to recognize it in your own life? The manuscript doesn't waste time with vague descriptions. Blavatsky lists specific, observable traits that anyone can learn to recognize. These aren't mystical abilities requiring years of training. They're subtle patterns that, once you know them, become impossible to unsee. The first sign, eyes that reflect but don't emit. Blavatsky describes this with precision that's almost uncomfortable. When you look into the eyes of one with a soul, she writes, there is a depth, a quality of light that seems to come from within, even when they're sad or tired. But the soulless ones have eyes like polished stones. They reflect whatever is projected onto them, but generate nothing of their own. She notes that these individuals blink at mechanical intervals, regardless of emotional context. Their pupils dilate reactively to light, but not to emotional stimuli. It's subtle, but once you're aware of it, you notice it everywhere. The second sign, emotions that are performed, not felt. This is perhaps the most disturbing observation. The soulless ones have learned to mimic feelings by observing others. They know that sadness requires lowered eyes and a certain tone of voice. They understand that joy involves smiling and animated gestures. They can execute these performances flawlessly. But there's always a microsecond delay, a fractional pause where they calculate the appropriate response before delivering it. Blavatsky describes it as actors who have studied their roles so thoroughly they no longer remember their acting, yet the essence of genuine spontaneity remains forever beyond them. Ask them about a moment of profound emotion, a time of deep grief or overwhelming joy, and watch carefully. Those with souls will access the memory directly, their body responding to the recalled feeling. The soulless ones will construct a description based on what such an experience should have contained, but their bodies remain neutral, disconnected from the words. The third sign, dreams without content. This was Blavatsky's most testable criterion. She claimed that those without souls either don't dream at all, or have dreams without light, without faces, without voices. In her experiments in India, she monitored sleep patterns using primitive electrodes of her own design. Subjects suspected of being soulless showed no rapid eye movement, no facial expressions during deep sleep, and upon waking reported only darkness or fabricated dreams clearly borrowed from books or conversations. They rest, she writes, but they do not journey, for dreams are portals of the soul. Modern sleep research has documented rare individuals with no REM sleep who describe their sleep as darkness without content, attributing it to neurological anomaly. But what if they were observing exactly what Blavatsky described over a century earlier? The fourth sign, absence of true nostalgia. Those with souls feel a peculiar ache when remembering the past, not just for specific events, but for the quality of time itself, for innocence lost. for the strangeness of having once been younger. The soulless ones can recall facts about their childhood, but there's no emotional resonance with their younger selves. It's as if they're describing a stranger, Blavatsky notes, because that's precisely what it is. The fifth sign, they leave you colder. Not metaphorically. Blavatsky claimed you can physically feel the temperature drop during prolonged interaction with a soulless being. Your extremities will cool, she writes. You may feel a slight pressure behind the eyes. You'll struggle to remember simple words. These are your soul's warning signals. She documented specific cases where ensouled individuals reported unexplained exhaustion after meetings with certain people, not from conflict or activity, but from something more subtle, as if essential vitality had been siphoned away. If any of this is resonating with you, if you're suddenly recognizing patterns you couldn't name before, share this video with someone you trust. Comment below your own observations. Have you experienced that inexplicable emptiness when looking at certain people? Because the next chapter reveals what Blavatsky believed was their ultimate impact on society, and why proximity to them can gradually extinguish even your own inner light. The most terrifying question isn't whether they exist, it's whether you've already been drained by one without knowing it. Blavatsky didn't see the soulless as evil. She saw them as deficits, beings who exist in a state of fundamental lack. And like any deficit, they unconsciously seek to balance themselves by drawing from surrounding sources. Think of it like atmospheric pressure. When you open a vacuum-sealed container, air rushes in not because the vacuum is malicious, but because nature abhors emptiness. The soulless ones operate on the same principle, but what they're drawing isn't air. It's life force, emotional energy, what ancient traditions called chi or prana. This isn't metaphorical exhaustion. Blavatsky describes specific physical symptoms that occur during and after interaction with these beings. Coldness in the center of the chest, slight pressure behind the eyes, sudden difficulty accessing vocabulary, and an overwhelming desire to be alone afterward, not from introversion, but from depletion. She observed this phenomenon across different cultures and social contexts, in hospitals, where emotional labor is constant, in government offices, where human processing becomes mechanical, in educational institutions, where creativity is standardized. Places where souls are processed as units, she writes, rather than recognized as sacred flames, become breeding grounds for the soulless and dangerous territories for the unsouled. The mechanism, according to her observations, works through proximity and attention. The more time you spend with a soulless being, especially in emotionally intimate contexts, the more your own energy attenuates to compensate for their emptiness. It's not conscious on their part. They aren't aware they're doing it. It's simply the physics of spiritual economy. She compared it to how a cold object will draw heat from a warm one until equilibrium is reached. But there's a crucial difference. You can be depleted to emptiness, but they will never be filled. The universal examples are everywhere once you know what to look for. That colleague who leaves everyone exhausted after meetings, yet seems energized themselves. That friend who monopolizes conversation, but never actually connects. That family member whose presence feels like being slowly buried under invisible weight. We usually attribute this to personality conflicts or emotional boundaries. But what if some of these experiences are literal energy transfer? What if your chronic exhaustion isn't from doing too much, but from being around someone who can only take? Blavatsky's most practical warning concerns long-term exposure. Those who live or work in constant proximity to the soulless, she writes, will notice gradual changes, diminished capacity for joy, difficulty accessing creativity, a spreading numbness where passion once lived. This is not depression. This is soul attenuation. The tragedy isn't that the soulless exist, it's that most ensouled people never learn to recognize and protect themselves from this drainage. They attribute their emptiness to modern life, to stress, to aging, never understanding that they're being spiritually cannibalized by beings who mean no harm, but cause it nonetheless through their fundamental nature. And if this is true, if some people genuinely cannot generate their own spiritual energy, then every moment of your unexplained exhaustion takes on new meaning. Every relationship that left you feeling hollow despite your best efforts suddenly makes a different kind of sense. The question becomes urgent. How do you protect what makes you human in a world where emptiness unconsciously hungers for light? The manuscript's most protected section contains what Blavatsky called the soul fortification ritual, a daily practice to prevent energy depletion. This portion shows more wear than any other, as if the few permitted to read it return to these pages repeatedly, urgently. The ritual isn't complex, but it requires discipline. 12 minutes at dawn, facing east. The breathing pattern follows a 4-4-8 count. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 8. This specific rhythm, she claims, creates a resonance that strengthens the electromagnetic field anchoring soul to body, a concept remarkably similar to theories later developed in quantum biology. While breathing, visualize amber light collecting at the center of your chest. Not golden, not white, specifically amber, the color of preserved life. With each breath, this light expands, forming a protective sphere around your entire body. The sphere must be mentally maintained throughout the day, refreshed whenever you encounter someone you suspect might be a vessel without light. The critical element is a mantra written in substitution cipher that took cryptographers 3 months to decode after the seal was broken. The word translates roughly to "I remain," though the original Sanskrit carries deeper connotations of conscious persistence against dissolution. Blavatsky claimed this sound vibration directly strengthens the soul's grip on physical form, preventing the gradual attenuation that occurs through proximity to the soulless. She describes it as building a wall not of separation, but of self-sustaining luminosity. But there's a darker mirror to this practice. Without daily fortification, she warns, even an initiate can slowly extinguish. The process isn't immediate. It happens gradually, imperceptibly, like sight fading so slowly you don't notice until you're trying to read in darkness. The manuscript describes stages of soul weakening. First, diminished capacity for wonder. Colors seem less vibrant, music loses its emotional resonance, beauty becomes conceptual rather than felt. Then comes the erosion of empathy, not because you stop caring, but because the mechanism through which you feel others' pain begins to malfunction. Finally, a state she calls soul sleepiness, where you're technically conscious but spiritually dormant, going through motions without genuine presence. This isn't clinical depression, though it mimics some symptoms. It's specifically what happens when the divine spark dims from depletion rather than defect. The ritual offers protection, but also diagnosis. If you perform it correctly, you should feel a distinct warmth in your chest within 3 minutes. If you feel nothing, or worse, if the practice makes you uncomfortable or you find yourself unable to maintain focus, Blavatsky suggests this indicates advanced depletion. Do not despair, she writes in a rare moment of tenderness. The flame that flickers is not extinguished, it merely requires conscious rekindling. If this resonates, if you recognize yourself in the stages of depletion, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. What follows isn't just about protection, it's about reclamation. Because Blavatsky didn't just identify the problem, she provided the solution, buried in pages that few have ever seen. But first, you need to understand why the world is producing more soulless beings than ever before, and why proximity to them is becoming unavoidable unless you learn to see them clearly. Blavatsky's most unsettling prediction appears in the manuscript's 3rd section. Written in her own hand, rather than dictated, the 21st century will see an exponential increase in vessels without light. She believed materialist civilization creates conditions where soul embodiment becomes less favorable. As material values ascend and spiritual awareness recedes, more vessels will come into existence without the divine spark. This is neither good nor evil. It is simply the cycle of Kali Yuga manifesting as it must. What makes this chilling is how precisely it describes our current moment. She predicted the rise of what she called mechanical thinking, patterns of consciousness that prioritize efficiency over meaning, consumption over creation, reaction over reflection. She specifically mentioned technologies that would externalize consciousness and create environments where soul development is actively discouraged. The manuscript contains a timeline that reads like prophecy. She describes mass media systems that would simulate emotional experience without requiring genuine feeling. She references computational technologies that would create the illusion of connection while preventing true communion. She even outlines something remarkably similar to what we now call the Internet, a web of instant communication that paradoxically isolates individuals within their own echoing chambers. Most disturbing is her claim that society would restructure itself to reward those without inner light. Their inability to feel deep compassion, to experience existential questioning, to connect beyond utility, these will become advantages in systems designed for consumption rather than consciousness. She describes how traditional soul-nurturing practices would be systematically devalued and replaced by simulations of spiritual experience. Quick gratifications that provide temporary emotional relief without actual soul development. Does that sound familiar? The endless scroll through curated images of other people's manufactured joy. The mindfulness apps that commodify meditation while stripping away its transformative power. The wellness industry that sells enlightenment by the bottle. The self-help industrial complex that treats spiritual emptiness as a problem to be solved with the right productivity system. Blavatsky predicted all of it, not as specific technologies, but as inevitable expressions of a civilization turning away from the invisible and authentic toward the visible and simulated. She wrote, "In the coming age, people will increasingly construct artificial identities based on external validation rather than internal authenticity. They will perform emotions they've learned should be felt rather than experiencing genuine inner movement. The soulless ones will thrive in this environment because they are already expert performers, and those with souls will struggle, feeling increasingly alien in a world that no longer recognizes or values their essential nature." Reading this in 2024 feels like discovering a message specifically meant for this exact moment. The rising rates of what we call anxiety and depression, the epidemic of loneliness despite constant connectivity, the strange hollowness at the center of abundance, the exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. What if these aren't just symptoms of modern stress? What if they're the precise fulfillment of Blavatsky's warning about living in a world increasingly populated by those who can only drain what they cannot generate? Like this video right now if you're feeling that recognition in your bones. Because what comes next isn't about fear, it's about becoming undrainable. Share this with someone who needs to understand why they're so inexplicably tired. But first you need to know, the soulless ones aren't static, they're evolving. The manuscript's most disturbing revelation comes in its final pages, written with shaking hand. The empty vessels will learn to project the appearance of depth as a desert mirage simulates water. Blavatsky observed that soulless beings possess a peculiar adaptive capacity. Over time, through constant observation of the unsouled, they refine their performances until the simulation becomes nearly indistinguishable from authenticity. They learn which phrases evoke trust. They master the micro-expressions that signal empathy. They study the cadence of genuine enthusiasm and replicate it flawlessly. Most dangerously, they develop the ability to simulate vulnerability, the trait that most powerfully disarms suspicion. In modern language, we might call them perfect social engineers. They excel in environments that reward surface performance over depth of character. They thrive in positions requiring charisma without conscience, persuasion without conviction. Consider the colleague who always says the right thing, but whose support evaporates when you actually need help. The friend who mirrors your personality so perfectly you feel understood, yet something always feels slightly off. The romantic partner who performed perfect intimacy until commitment was required, then revealed a strange absence where constancy should have been. We usually attribute these patterns to narcissism, manipulation, or emotional immaturity. But what if some of these individuals aren't damaged souls, they're absent ones? The evolution Blavatsky describes is adaptive, not conscious. Just as a plant grows toward light without awareness, the soulless learn to approximate soul qualities, because doing so facilitates survival in human environments. They don't know they're performing because they have no authentic internal state to compare the performance against. This makes detection increasingly difficult. The crude signs, emotional flatness, mechanical responses, become refined through constant adjustment. What remains is harder to identify. Perhaps a slight hollow quality to the eyes when they think no one's watching. A momentary confusion when asked to make decisions requiring genuine values rather than strategic advantage. An inability to be alone without distraction for extended periods. Or most tellingly, the consistent pattern of leaving others depleted while they themselves remain energized. In our current world of personal branding, curated authenticity, and performed vulnerability, the distinction between someone skillfully managing their public image and someone fundamentally empty has become razor thin. Blavatsky's warning echoes across 133 years. In the coming age, those with souls must learn to recognize their own kind, not by what they say or do, but by what they leave unsaid, and by how you feel in their presence when all performance ceases. The question isn't whether you've met them, it's whether you've recognized them for what they are. Now you stand at a crossroads. You can close this browser, dismiss this knowledge as mystical nonsense, return to the comfortable assumption that everyone you meet possesses the same internal reality you do, that all emptiness is circumstantial, that all exhaustion is your own fault for not managing energy better. Or you can accept the possibility that Blavatsky was right, that among us walk beings who appear human in every external way, but lack the essential divine spark. That some of your most draining relationships weren't failures of communication or compatibility. They were encounters with entities incapable of genuine connection. This isn't about judgment. The soulless aren't evil any more than a black hole is evil. They're simply operating according to their nature. The tragedy is that they don't know what they lack, because they've never experienced its presence. But you have a choice that changes everything. Will you learn to protect your light, or will you continue giving it away to those who can't reciprocate? This means confronting uncomfortable truths. That colleague who always leaves you drained, you might need to minimize contact, not from cruelty, but from self-preservation. That family member who monopolizes every gathering, yet leaves everyone empty, you might need boundaries that feel harsh but are necessary. That friend who performs intimacy perfectly but vanishes when you genuinely need support. You might need to recognize the relationship for what it actually is, a performance you're sustaining through your own soul energy. Blavatsky wrote, "The most profound spiritual practice is learning when to withhold your light. For the soulless ones will draw it endlessly if permitted, not from malice but from their fundamental nature. And you cannot fill an emptiness that was never meant to hold light. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone who frustrates you. Unsouled people can be difficult, draining, even toxic. But there's a difference between someone struggling with their soul and someone who has no soul to struggle with. The question is, can you feel the difference now? When you think of specific people in your life, can you sense that subtle distinction between someone whose difficulties arise from their soul's journey versus someone whose difficulties arise from its absence? Comment below. Has this changed how you see someone in your life? I genuinely want to know how this knowledge is affecting your perception. Because what comes next requires courage. The courage to see clearly even when clarity is uncomfortable. You're about to discover what happens when the unsouled refuse to be drained anymore. Here's what they never wanted you to know. Blavatsky wasn't alone in this discovery. The symbol engraved on the back cover of her manuscript, a complex geometric pattern part mandala, part mathematical equation, appears in only one other place, Rudolf Steiner's private papers from 1913. Steiner, who founded Anthroposophy after breaking from Theosophy, rarely mentioned Blavatsky in his later works. Yet his lectures on elemental beings and the threshold of the spiritual world contain veiled references to concepts strikingly similar to her vessels without light. He called them shells that move as men, and incorporated her protective symbol into the architecture of the Goetheanum, specifically in windows designed to filter light in certain patterns. Patterns that, according to his private notes, helped ensouled individuals maintain energetic coherence in environments with high concentrations of the hollow ones. But it goes deeper. Carl Jung's Red Book, his record of psychological breakdown and spiritual emergence, contains passages about what he called empty people. In a private letter to physicist Wolfgang Pauli, he mentioned HPB's final warning, and noted that it aligned with his observations of certain patients who displayed perfect persona function without individual essence. The Vatican archives contain a 12th century manuscript with remarkably similar descriptions, though couched in religious terminology. It speaks of shadows that walk upright and bodies animated without divine breath. This text remains sealed by papal decree. Only 3 people in each generation are permitted to read it, and they must take a vow never to discuss its contents outside consecrated space. Even Einstein, in unpublished letters, questioned whether consciousness might be quantized rather than universal, suggesting some human forms might lack the quantum coherence necessary for true awareness. He abandoned this inquiry abruptly in 1947, destroying his notes and never mentioning it publicly again. Why? Because this knowledge is weaponizable. Once you can identify those without souls, what prevents that recognition from becoming a tool for dehumanization? What stops it from justifying cruelty toward those deemed hollow? This is why Blavatsky sealed her manuscript with the warning, "This knowledge must inspire compassion, not fear, for they are not enemies, but expressions of cosmic necessity." The pattern is clear. Throughout history, certain individuals have recognized this truth. They've tried to share it carefully, encoded in symbol and metaphor, protected by secrecy and time. Share this video immediately with someone you trust, because the final chapter reveals not just how to protect yourself, but why you specifically are reading this right now. Why your soul recognized this truth before your mind could name it. The coincidence of you being here isn't coincidence at all. If you've made it to this final chapter, it's not by accident. Blavatsky believed that certain knowledge finds those who need it most, that souls vibrant enough to perceive these distinctions are naturally drawn to information about them, not from paranoia or superiority, but from an unconscious need to understand why the world feels increasingly draining. Your recognition of these patterns suggests your own soul is strong enough to not only withstand depletion, but potentially help others recognize and protect theirs. This awareness itself forms the first layer of protection. The second layer is the daily practice, 12 minutes at dawn, the 4 to 4-8 breath, the amber sphere, the mantra of "I remain," not as superstition, but as deliberate maintenance of the connection between your physical and spiritual aspects. The third layer is discernment, learning to recognize when exhaustion is yours versus when it's being imposed through proximity to those who drain rather than exchange. And the final layer is choosing consciously who receives your time, your attention, your energy, understanding that withholding your light from those who can only consume it isn't cruelty, it's survival. Blavatsky's manuscript ends with a prayer. May those with the divine spark recognize each other in the growing darkness. May they preserve the sacred flame not through separation, but through conscious communion. For the age comes when light itself must learn new ways of shining. You are that light. Your exhaustion isn't weakness. It's evidence you've been giving away something precious to those who cannot reciprocate. If you've stayed until the end, subscribe to this channel right now, hit the like button, and share in the comments what most impacted you about this journey. Because our next exploration reveals Einstein's hidden equations that measured consciousness itself, and why he destroyed most of his notes after reaching a conclusion too dangerous to share. The truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers to those ready to hear, and you're ready. You've always been ready. That's why you're here.